I can get in my car and drive out there and go make sure that something's been done if it's a large event. So my job is really to protect the bank, because construction loans are risky. Not everyone is as good a construction company as this. And so a lot of times when the people come to me, they've already chosen a builder. And I can't say anything about, it's not my job to say whether it's a quality builder or not. And even on houses and on buildings. And so I don't sometimes know every construction company. So my job is to protect the bank in a risky loan so that I don't have to hire, and I've had to, another construction company to come in and finish something. So, and then my job is to protect you so that when you get to the end, you don't say to me, oh, we've had $500,000 in cost overruns and the building, now I've spent more money than what it's worth. And so my job is to monitor all of that and make sure everything stays on target. I make the builder and the borrower sign off on every single change order. And I keep a running list of the change orders so that they see it every single month. This is how much I've gone over budget. And I've had to explain, you need to be thinking about where you're going to get the money, because if I give you money for a change order, you have less to spend on the original contract, so you better plan for. But in commercial construction, it doesn't happen very often. It's mainly in homes, because people will say, oh, I really want that Viking range, and I know that my construction budget was a Frigidaire, and I really want this $10,000 stove. So it doesn't happen in commercial building hardly at all for me. And then I work on what the permanent loan is for you and what fits your cash flow and your timing and all that, and how soon you want to pay it off, and really then help structure that with you. And sometimes I give you that structure in the very beginning of the construction process. Here's your construction loan structure, and then here's what permanent will do. So, any questions? So I have a handout with all that information on it for you.
Does anyone put your handout?
And we do make loans on owner-occupied and non-owner, but if you're going to be the owner in it, you need to have about 51% of the lease space. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, James?
You got one after this?
Yes. Should be there.
So my name is James Ryder. I run a small real estate brokerage firm called ROI Real Estate. Focus on commercial real estate. I probably spend most of my time in facilitating land transactions, office transactions, or industrial transactions. Do some retail as well. As we grow and build our team, probably have some people specialize in that. I'm kind of a relationship forward person though, so I think it's helpful to have some diversity and be able to offer a varied expertise. For example, some of you in the room would know sometimes industrial owners or tenants act a certain way and have certain standards, and a retail operation might negotiate or act a certain way. And sometimes it's helpful to compare on improving the process on how one discipline works. But we do probably, just so you know, that's where the majority of our business comes. I have a background in land development, actually, and studied landscape architecture, worked for a very large builder in the metro in land development. So I'll add some interjections in my talk about buying land, if it matters to you. But the talk will be basically over the process from purview of a user of a building, or maybe an investor. So it would be the buyer or the tenant. If you're the landlord or an owner, you can kind of think through it inversely, or if you know someone who's trying to list some property, I'd be happy to walk through that as well. I've tried to set it up where it's a standard, following a standard process, but I'll make some ad-libs for things that are special. So I want to compliment Brett and Hillary on their talks. They touched on a lot of things that I think I would love for people to know before they pick up the phone and call a broker. So occasionally I'll ask a filtering call, like, hey, have you chatted with your loan officer or your banker about this? Because it's nice not to get that person, like, insert in the process backwards. So I always like to, if I know they've got a team, to try and hear from the team a little bit, or at least know they're talking to them. And if they don't have a team, I'd like to help them assemble one. So if you have a friend or you yourself are doing it, this idea of like, hey, here's the types of people on your team, it's so crucial. And I'd recommend staying in touch with them throughout the process. You know, they might tell you, hey, you're good to go, you got the green light, this is the amount you can get I'll approve you for. But I'd check back in at a certain point before you make your go time decision. So I might mention that here and there throughout the process. So I'm really going to cover like lease or acquisition, and I'm going to assume the talk's structured around like an existing building, but I'm going to make some comments if we're buying and improving or if we're building a building. So the first, before I go forward, I'll say generally if someone's just like, hey, I've got a bunch of money, I want to go buy a building, and they don't know where to go, I do kind of let them think about, hey, you've got a few options. So really, you could go buy an existing building. Maybe buying's not right, you need to go through leasing. I like that idea. And for me, I think the biggest one's capital. It's like, how much capital do you have, and is it making more money in your business or in the real estate? You could also go buy, sometimes the piece of the building just isn't there. You could go buy a piece of land and build a building, which we've talked about a little bit. And then, in addition, kind of a hybrid, it's like you could buy just for you and go ahead and invest at the same time. So like what you've done here, Dima, it's really neat when you can walk in, when you can help someone build a strategy and say, hey, wouldn't it be neat if the building could stand on its own with a lease from your business, but it could stand on its own if you move too? Like that'd be a neat structure. So I have, as a story, I have a nail salon operator, a client of mine. He'll go in and buy a piece of land, build a retail center, and the profits from the salon alone could cover and break even on the center. Yeah, if he leased up the center and pulled his nail salon out, he'd be doing just fine. So it's kind of a neat plan. But we'll talk through all that. Sometimes I float those questions out and help people look 5, 10, 15 years in the future too, because today's lease might impact your next step. So step one, I'd say, yeah, chat with your commercial banker and probably your CPA at the same time. Get a sense for your budget. I think the broker can help spitball some numbers with you in the process to make sure they're real. Just like, hey, generally speaking, 1,000-foot view, how far can you get for this amount of money per foot per year, or this amount of money for a purchase? So chat through with your CPA and your banker if you want to buy or lease. If you're buying, I think that's the point where you talk about those 3 strategies I just mentioned. You know, are you going to move into an existing building? Do you have the time and the energy to buy land and build with a vision for it? Or do you want to do an owner-user type of structure, either totally owner-user or a partial investment? I would also mention at some point early in the process, be candid about what's your time constraint. If your time constraint is 30 days, you need to find an existing building and we might be behind anyway. So go ahead and pay ahead on your current lease so you can secure it. If I just spoke people very broadly, I'd be happy to be corrected during Q&A on this. If you'd like to build a building, we need to be planning, like in an ideal world, like 18 months to 2 years out or longer. If we're at 18 months, we're probably behind in a lot of scenarios, especially if the land's not platted, which I could mention later. Establish your criteria. So it's really going to be all about you and your business. Where do you need to be? Is visibility important to you? What sort of geographic range are you serving? If you're a retail business, you know, where do you need to be in proximity to your customer? If you're a service business, doesn't matter to be on the hard corner or the soft corner, because there are huge ramifications in your budget. Access, this is important for everyone, I think, whether you're retail, whether you're industrial. It's like, how are you using that facility? And is there something that's just totally going to hamper your ability to make money as a business there? For example, industrial business, if you don't have a turning radius appropriate for the 18-wheeler, it's obsolete for you. And even if it's not right now, but you might go there later, it might be worth paying a little bit more. I have an eye surgeon who's a client of mine, and for him, he's made the comment, like, you know, most of my people can't see very well, and he's like, and oddly enough, the people who are bringing them apparently can't see very well either. It's like, I know a lot of people, the whole visibility thing is just a farce in their mind, but for me, I think it's real. Like, I think the next property I move to, when I buy that permanent one, it's worth me paying a few dollars more per foot for the piece of land that we buy, just for directions to be simple. So he's looking at it from the standpoint of like, hey, the income per visit and to not roll as many visits is worth me paying more for my real estate. So those are the types of things that are worth sharing with your broker up front, so they don't waste your time as they source options for you. And then neighbors, you know, is it okay if the CBD shop's next to you? Do you not want it there? You know, kind of share that up front so we can go through it. And then establishing criteria continued. Parking, so you know, have a clear view of your parking. Is it shared with your neighbor? Is it not? Construction, what are your needs? This is huge, especially if you're a retail user. Most of the retail industry, you're going to have to probably do some tenant improvement to the property. So have a sense for what kind of construction budget you might have even if you're a tenant, and what you truly need there. I think it'd be helpful if you're coming to your broker, if they can't visualize with you before you set up a tour and go everywhere, go to like one property or two, or reference a property you've known and have been in and walk through that. Again, just to not waste your time when they're putting together several options for you. Timing, I mentioned it, but this is one where I see people make long-term business decisions in a rush just because they didn't plan ahead enough. So if you're leasing and you plan to lease, like I'd say a year, once you've got a year away from the end of your lease, start, you know, if you haven't started, might be engaged with your current landlord if you want to stay. A lot of these leases have a 60-day notice period for your option or 90-day. Frankly, I think if you don't begin firming it up by that time and you desire to lease and it requires any sort of build out, or you desire to build and own something, you're already far behind by the time that one gets there. So just be cognizant of that. It could just be part of your quarterly planning if you're a business owner or an investor. Know your zoning restrictions. Definitely have an understanding of where you can and cannot operate and what that might mean about your neighbors too. If you don't understand them or the broker you're working with doesn't understand them well, city municipality is actually fairly great at educating you in that. But if it's very important, you have to make sure your broker is aware of it early. Meeting with the contractor. Meet with them early, and I made a note here, get feedback throughout. So I'll use that retail tenant. Let's say you want to sell, let's say you're a restaurant. If you don't have a rough thumb, you know, back of napkin sketch or a rule of thumb, here's about how much per square foot my build out's going to cost, then at the very beginning of the search, we might be identifying spaces that don't even matter for you. So once you build that into your effective rent or operating costs, whether it's through the form of a loan or through your own cash reserves, you might be behind from the beginning. But I check with them once you've narrowed down your short list, run it by your builder, by your banker. Hey, these are the three I'm thinking. What are your guys' perspective? Can I still run with that $100 a square foot number or whatever the assumption is? So I meet with them early. And really, I can engage all these people. You see, I've got broker down at the beginning. Sometimes I'm number one, and you've probably experienced that. Is it Chris? You probably experienced. You might be the first person they've told about this. I just want to highlight that. Get everyone else involved early too. I think it's crucially important. But when you're evaluating a real estate broker, you know, I'd ask them, hey, what kind of property do you deal with? What are some of your clients? Make sure they've got experience in the industry. As I mentioned, I spend a lot of time in office, industrial, and land. And so if someone wanted to go buy a site and get a building built, I would feel like I could walk their hand through every piece of that. One of the brokers who's a very good friend of mine, he'd be a lot better working with a retail client, but he'd be a little lost on that one. So I think quiz them a little bit, ask for references. I think it's helpful to ask your other members of your team for reference too. Discuss your concept and your criteria. It's good to know that the broker is typically paid by the seller or the landlord, but I go ahead and ask and get clarity on that. The broker, if they've got a real estate sign out in front of the building, they've probably got a listing agreement with someone, and that co-brokerage is covered there. But be clear, I mean, it's how brokers get paid is by serving clients, and usually the industry's set up to afford that fee. The fee is usually capped, for those of you who might be in the landlord position, it's calculated off a percentage of sale or percentage of rents over the initial lease term, most typically. There's some other arrangements that exist too. So finding the right space, I'd first give all that criteria to the broker, maybe share some examples of things you like, and let them pull together a series of options for you. Before you go view a bunch of places, I always like to get some feedback from a customer, so I might send 30 options and then say, hey, based on what you told me, I like these 3. What are your thoughts? Is there anything else that pop out? Depending on the type of property, we may sit down and have a meeting and talk through the granular aspects because there's moving targets and variables. At that point, if it's clear enough, I just go look at the spaces. If we haven't narrowed it down, it's good to go take a windshield tour and drive around and look at them and then evaluate the best spaces. And then once you find, I think during this find the right space, I don't have this note up here, but I would say analyze your effective rent. And I use the word effective just to say that at each lease property, you can see, Demon, you know what you guys are leasing your space here for? Demon, you know what your space is marketed for lease here, as an example?
And like per square foot?
Yeah,
About 5.5.
5.5.
Yeah,
Okay.
so $5.50 a square foot, and then
Triple net lease?
triple net, it's like 56 cents.
Okay, so her effective rent, assuming, not reading the lease, is about $6, right? I've seen some, and in retail this is pretty common, you might see a $20 square foot lease being advertised, and then you might see a 22 down the street. Often that $20 foot lease is more expensive than the 22, because the $20 foot lease might be a triple net lease with a $4 CAM, and the CAM fee is an ambiguous term sometimes, because there might be other things put in there, but $4 in pass-throughs, taxes, insurance, and common area maintenance. Whereas the $22 foot rent place could be a gross lease where everything's in there. So if I'm talking Greek, you would want to go ahead and ask your broker, like, explain the different types of leases. But on a very high scale, there's a gross lease, landlord pays everything. There's a net lease, tenant pays almost everything, landlord just gets base rent. And then there's modified gross or modified net, which is a gradient of everything in between. And it could be a lot of different ways. So when you find the right place, I'd ask the broker, hey, what do you estimate my rent to be? And so sometimes it's a little ambiguous and you have to kind of work through that with the landlord. Understanding that before you make an offer to negotiate is good to know, like what's the base point they're at here. So there's 2 ways to negotiate. I broke it out too. You could just jump straight to a lease sometimes, or a purchase contract. If it's fairly straightforward or it's a part of a larger complex, we've sort of understood what it is. But often what precedes the lease is a letter of intent, short little 1 to 2 page document that outlines the high points of the negotiation. It's typically non-binding, but basically we go through, here's what they're marketing, here's what we're going to ask them. Typically the things negotiated are price, term, who covers what type of maintenance, how the taxes and insurance are structured, and then any special thing about build out or timing or contingencies. There's a varied amount of them per property type or type of transaction. The broker probably has a template that you can manipulate. I'd advise, just as a broker, seeing a lot of things get broken apart with unrealistic letter of intent negotiations, I'd advise your broker to solicit from the owner first some of that information, like where they are as a base point, before they just shoot over an arbitrary LOI. With regard to LOI negotiations, I think a broker, one of the best things that I see out there is a broker who can create win-win deal points. So the broker needs, as your tenant rep, to represent you well and get the best thing for you. He also needs to understand how the landlord thinks and what's important to them, and be able to marry the 2 together. So sometimes you might have to be able to talk landlord language, especially if he's talking to both of them. But you should definitely be knowledgeable in the industry, understand what you need, and be able to craft that in a way the landlord can say yes. And then it needs to be timely, definitely. Sometimes just waiting around for a response from the landlord causes a negotiation to fall apart. So if the LOI is a tool being used for a sale or a lease, typically the lease negotiation, the landlord either hands that off to an attorney or someone on the team, and they draft a full lease document, and then both parties review the lease Typically, if the LOI was used effectively, there shouldn't be a lot of negotiating in the lease. It's just really making sure that the legalese that's added to that mirrors the intent of what both parties had. Sometimes you see these redlined. I also see cases where this LOI negotiation skipped and the lease or purchase contract is jumped straight to, especially in a purchase contract. Let's say it's just a very straightforward office building, standalone, one lot. You might be able to not create the double work of an LOI. And your broker might use a state form or a pre-prepared form, his or her brokerage firm has. Sale negotiations, really the same thing as lease. Broker should provide guidance on who might pay for what's standard in that. I would advise in a sales state to keep the negotiations from a strategy as focused on what's most important to you. So if it's purchase price or effective price, don't throw in 100 other things to make it confusing to calculate. Just focus on the purchase price. The sale contract process, typically after it's contracted, most often a title company or maybe a title attorney will facilitate that closing. They'll manage it. The broker's main role, in my opinion, at that point is to drive accountabilities through the process there, and then provide you an extra level of oversight. Know your broker's non-attorney. So if it's a complex transaction, perhaps a land transaction, get your civil engineer, get your builder, get your attorney involved in that process to review the ALTA commitment or the ALTA survey. So typically would end at closing or lease execution, the process of the broker working with you. A good broker should be available to you and in touch with you throughout the process, and hopefully helps you plan for what happens after the next 3 years if you've got a 3-year lease. This kind of outlined a standard process. I think if you're going to go after purchasing land, for example, there'd be a few more things inserted there, but I'd be happy to discuss anything or answer anything else during the Q&A.
Thank you.
Question. And I don't know which one of you all can answer this, but I've always wondered. So what makes the person decide if they want to have a triple net or, is this a tax question? Because to me, for example, just my home loan, they escrow for taxes and insurance and it's easy and I make one payment. And so what makes people decide if they want to just make it easy and make one payment, or if they want to pay their taxes and insurance separately?
Well, as far as I know, it's more of a budget. A lot of times, and I'm sure our tax department probably does that more, but if you pay the escrow for the tax and stuff with it, I'd usually probably recommend that, just because a lot of times when you have that expense once during the year, you may not necessarily be able to plan for it as well. Just know obviously those will increase. Obviously, if your property taxes increase annually, or I guess could possibly decrease, but so there's a little variability there, but at least you can kind of plan a little better to split it out between a month. And it's probably, from a CPA standpoint, it's probably just budgeting, cash flow. If you have pretty steady cash flow, it's probably a good idea. Sometimes there's seasonality affects things. If you have good cash flow around the time your payments become due, it's another concern as well.
I see the lease structure as far as are you asking in a triple net lease how they're handled on an annual basis or monthly basis, or the two different lease structures?
Well, what makes a borrower decide, or someone leasing, to decide if they want to just pay rent and pay their own taxes and insurance and maintenance, or if they want to make one payment, is there an economy of scale or something that so all the other tenants get, based on the square footage, a percentage of what the taxes are for the whole building or the insurance? So what is it? Is it just that?
Yeah, I think it seems like landlord leads that a little bit, and it probably depends mostly on the landlord's, landlord or management company's overall management strategy of how they've set it up. And a lot of them will gravitate towards trying to keep, at least per asset class or type, all of them the same. So even if a tenant came in and said, hey, I want a gross lease, they might say, hey, I'm sorry, that this is how it's structured out here. From working backwards from the landlord's perspective, I'm going to answer it from the landlord's or the tenant, because I think they do it more often. I have to explain this both ways. Someone could argue that one way is better or the other, but in reality, a triple net lease, there's a base rent factor, and that's the profit to the landlord. Everything else, maintenance, taxes, insurance, pass through. So it's almost like the contract with your GC, like, here's what it costs, here's the extras, here's my profit, here's what it costs. Whereas a modified gross lease or gross lease is just like, here's what you pay, and you don't know how much the landlord's profiting or not per se, if that makes sense. So it's a way of just kind of segregating them. It's like, here's the true costs, we'll update you annually on what they are. I prefer when operators run that where it's actually set up as a monthly additional rent estimation, because then it's a lot easier to budget. There's an annual reconciliation. But yeah, I think it seems to be more landlord dictated or market dictated. So if a whole market, like if all of Norman's running modified gross leases for office spaces, it's going to look weird for someone to be offering a triple net lease, because the tenant will be like, that looks weird. I don't know if I trust you. It's just kind of a different.
Well, I guess you'd worry too if somebody didn't pay their taxes, and you'd have to keep up on.
Well, yeah, that's a really good point.
Or
I know
their place burns down and burns the whole resident building down, and they haven't paid their insurance on their area, so. Okay.
So for us, when we bought the building, it was 50% occupied, so we were basically absorbing what the landlord had already done, and that's why we were doing triple net. I think what's interesting though, my very first landlord on downtown, he had it where it was just a gross lease. But in my contract it said he had the right that we would have to pay taxes yearly and he would just bill us. Well, he never did that. Never billed us. And I was wondering when that big, because I was always holding money back, right? I'm like, because we were new and I'm holding my pennies, like, how much is this going to be? And I was too scared to ask him. And then for 5 years he never did. So too often I think with buildings is, it's not usually the primary revenue for that person. So for like us, owning this building is kind of a side business. It's kind of an afterthought almost, right? We have a CPA that manages it, but we don't really think about it on a day-to-day basis. And like my landlord back then, he had a primary business. Owning buildings was just kind of his side gig, and it wasn't given a lot of priority. So I just think it's inherent.
Yeah.
You just inherit something, and then it's whoever. He had that lease for 20-something years, and I asked all of it because this was a guy he probably had over 30 different buildings. I asked all the tenants, like, oh yeah, we've never in 10 years had to pay taxes. So he was just paying them tax, and he didn't know what his lease held. To our benefit.
You'd be shocked how many landlords aren't aware of how their lease is structured.
Right. So interesting. Well, Rick, it's all you. There's a clicker up there that has your presentation.
Hillary, if you wanted to get into the weeds on that, I could unpack a little more of my conjecture on it.
I'm just kind of curious.
Yes.
Everett Stiller, KKT Architects. We do basically everything. You name it, we do it. We do hospitals, schools, small, large, intermediate projects. I mainly do what is called tenant improvement projects. So I'm the one that goes into the building when you all lease it. When you finish your lease, or I work with you while you're leasing it to get it all done and ready for the tenant. But you all are talking about the lease agreements, and I know if you go into a building, there's a thing called a core factor. And that core factor, whatever your lease, whatever the square footage number is, it's a number added to that to bring it up, and that helps cover maintenance of the building and other things. We're going to talk about the design process. And this presentation design process is mainly for a ground up building. Some of it will be the same for if you're leasing, some of it won't. Quite a bit of it won't. And that's our team. We actually have, only thing we don't have in-house is MEP. So we have basically everything in-house, civil, structural. And on the backside, we're probably the only firm that has 16 interior designers on staff. Probably the only one. Most of them is like 5, if that. And that's because we have a large market of tenant improvement in Tulsa. All right, the process. This is the whole line process. We'll break it down into different segments. But the first process is what we call visioning. Is when we come meet with you. We do programming, we come meet with you, we find out what you want. What is your vision? What you want to do is tell the person your vision. And you want your vision to come to light. You don't want their vision to come to light. They're here to guide you and have your vision to come to light. And we will provide imagery and everything else to help your vision come to light. Yes, we will probably make some changes to your vision because it's not because it won't, but a lot of times it's due to code. It's code reasons. Yeah, we can't do that. And we try to stay out of the issues of using somebody else's driveway, turning the building into a driveway, using someone else's. So that's the big reason why we have civil engineering in-house, because those are the first questions we ask. Where can we put this building on the lot? How is it going to affect watershed and other things? And one thing that he mentioned when he was talking about, no, it was she mentioned it, was about floodplain. Floodplain issues are a real thing, and it's a 100-year floodplain, and they haven't changed it in 100 years. So it may never flood at your building, but if you're in a floodplain, you have to have all, not only financially, but there's certain things you have to do to your building to make it flood-proof. How can I say it? It's not flood-proof. To put the mechanism in place to help the water stay out of your building. And so that's all a part of the visioning, and that's also a part, when we're talking about visioning and we're meeting with you, we need to find out what kind of business you're trying to do. Because depending on what type of business you're trying to do, you may not go in the area you're trying to go in, be able to go into the area you're trying to go into automatically. I say automatically because there's zoning codes that allow you to go in certain areas. But zoning will sometimes allow you to have a meeting with the zoning commission. You get all your lawyers together, you type out all the